for who you are in our lives, that you have called us your own. You have gifted us with the ability to be representation here on earth. And I thank you for each leader, each board member, each individual on this call, whatever brought them here today. Lord, I pray that your spirit would speak to them even as we share things. You just highlight things that are critical for them in this season, that they would recognize your nudging and that they would feel empowered, encouraged, blessed as a result of just spending this time today focused on their own board and on some of the basics. And Lord, if there are things that are in their heart and mind that just need to come out, questions, concerns to be raised, I pray, Father, that those things would come out today, and even you would guide Jonathan and myself as we share from what you've given us to share today. So we just commit this time to you. We welcome your spirit to move among us. We are grateful for each other and being part of your kingdom work, your body here on earth. And so we just are excited for this time, and we pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Just one other quick note. I will be sending out information after today's session about Bob Brown and his legal practice. Bob is sponsoring our session today. And plain and simple, if you need any help with anything legal or just want to bounce some things around with an attorney, we just always say make Bob your first contact, and he will either help you or get you to the right place. He's been a great partner of Venture 19 and provides a very valuable service to all of us. But let's get into it right now. And the first thing I want to do for just a couple minutes is highlight a few foundational concepts and principles connected with board leadership. And the first thing we want you to know today is that effective board leadership is really servant leadership, and it should be something that we call purpose-driven. In Mark chapter 10, Jesus said this, speaking to the disciples, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them." And the Greek there is people on a power trip. So you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them or are on a power trip over other people. And their high officials exercise authority over them. And then Jesus speaks into the disciples here, but not so with you. In fact, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And I just want to say that from a foundational concept, you need to make sure that your board is not on a power trip. It's not about how can other people serve us as board members. If you see my little play on words there, it's not about serve us. It's about service. And first, we need to see ourselves as a leadership team that is serving the Lord and serving the leaders of our organization, and ultimately serving the local community where God has us positioned. And of course, if you read on in Mark chapter 10, we read these words, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." I could go on and on about this, but a lot of boards get in trouble when they don't understand this concept and when they don't lead from this posture of being servant leaders and understanding that they are in place again to serve Jesus, to serve the leaders of the organization that they're connected with, and ultimately to serve the local community. That should be our number one priority. The other thing that's a bit of a foundational concept is that we need boards who are purpose driven. And the way that we define that is we are just saying that you need to be prioritizing your purpose or your cause, the work that you're doing, actually over your organization. And this is a little bit of a different way of thinking. And so let's compare and contrast this a little bit. We've got a traditional board mindset on the left versus a purpose-driven board mindset on the right. A traditional board thinks more along the lines like this: what is best for our organization, versus the purpose-driven mindset, which is what is best for the outcome that we seek in our community. Back to the left, traditional board. How will this impact or help our organization, versus how will this help us do what God has called us to do in our community and what will accomplish the most good? Again, on the left, how will this strategy advance our mission? And you can see the pattern there, right? It's all about us and we and our. How will this strategy advance our mission versus how will this strategy advance the cause in our community, creating awareness, involvement, and like-minded people coming together? And then bottom left here, what do we think is best versus what does God, our stakeholders, and those we serve think is best? So as a board, are we good listeners? Are we staying in tune with the needs of our community? So again, a contrast of what do we want to do versus what is needed in our community. Remember, your nonprofit exists not for the sake of the nonprofit, but for the sake of meeting needs where you are, solving problems where you are, advancing the gospel, and hopefully, right, the result of all that is not just needs being met, but people coming closer to Christ. And so, in order to fulfill a calling like that, we really need to think and be in line with more of a purpose-driven board mindset. So again, just a few foundational concepts there as we begin. But here's where we are headed today. We're going to cover four main topics. And the first one is just basic board responsibilities. And I'm going to share about these for just a few minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Heather. So let's jump in here. So there are certain things that need to be in place and you need to understand as a board leadership team. And the first thing you need to understand are the board leadership legal duties. And so we summarize all of those with these three categories. First, duty of care. As a board member, one of your duties is to make sure that the nonprofit is being taken care of. And you do that by staying informed about all aspects of the organization, ensuring a prudent use of all assets, including finances, facilities, and people. Are you adequately caring for the nonprofit that God has placed really under your care and protection? Are you shepherding the nonprofit in the right direction? Next is duty of loyalty. This is where you ensure that the nonprofit's activities and transactions are first and foremost advancing its mission. So you're staying on track with everything that God has called you to do. And you are making decisions that are in the best interest of the nonprofit. And this is where it ties back into being a purpose-driven board. And you are making decisions that are in the best interest of the community that you are serving. And then next is a duty of obedience. This is where you ensure that the nonprofit obeys applicable laws and regulations, follows its own bylaws, and that the nonprofit adheres to its stated corporate purpose and mission. This is very, very important. Your nonprofit, even though you are being led by God, hopefully, you need to be in compliance. You need to be in good standing with organizations, right? Like the IRS. And so this is all a part of that, making sure that you're operating the way that you need to operate, that you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, and making sure everything is being handled with integrity. Another term for a board member, and I like this, is a trustee. And so this is a good place to insert that descriptive word. So a trustee, right, is a person who occupies a position of trust, a trusted individual who does not act on behalf of themselves, but on the best interest of the organization, right? So again, it connects back to serving the Lord and serving the leaders connected with your nonprofit and serving your local community, making sure you're operating the way that you are supposed to and operating in a way that best serves your purpose and your mission. And again, these things are foundational for board leadership. Something else that's very important when it comes to board leadership is confidentiality. And this list could be a lot longer, but I've just added a few things here that are very important to understand. You need to practice confidentiality as a leadership team because that helps protect sensitive information. It encourages open and honest discussion. It maintains trust and integrity within your team, protects the organization's reputation, ensures legal compliance, right? That's actually one of the calls of our organizations is that we need to handle confidentiality well, safeguards donor and stakeholder trust, prevents misinformation and misinterpretation, which is really significant here. And of course, it upholds professionalism and ethics. I would summarize this entire slide by saying when you have a commitment to confidentiality, you are creating a safe space and place for your board members to really get into discussions at a deep level, to make tough decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. The other way to look at this is think about it. If you do not have a commitment to confidentiality, right, what is that going to create? It's going to create people holding back, looking over their shoulders, and it's not going to be a safe space and place for the deep level discussions and decisions that you need to make. So very, very important concept that we want to highlight right up front here. Next, board leadership, basic responsibilities. Your board needs to be about at least these four things: setting direction for the organization and the nonprofit, gaining direction from God, and Heather's going to talk about this a little bit later on, and then helping to lead the organization in that direction, ensuring adequate resources. So what does it mean to not just have that mission and vision and purpose, but are you also helping to generate the resources needed? Are you fundraising on behalf of the organization? Are you talking to others about supporting the work of the organization? That could be an entire workshop in and of itself, but the board is responsible for making sure that the organization has the resources necessary to do what God is calling it to do. And then another big responsibility is to hire, care for, support, and evaluate the CEO. One of the biggest responsibilities of the board is to make sure that you have the right leader in place, and then to care for that leader, support that leader, and yes, evaluate that leader. We recommend that that happens annually to ensure that the CEO is moving in the direction that you feel like as a board the organization needs to move, moving in the direction that God is calling the organization, and is carrying things out in a right and godly way. And if you have questions about how to properly evaluate your CEO or executive director, reach out to us. That'd be a great coaching topic, and we can talk quite a bit more about that. And then the other responsibility is to provide foresight, insight, and oversight to the CEO by the creation of policies. And I'm not going to get into all that right now. Heather's going to touch on that a little bit. But one of the things that you are responsible for is creating policies that in turn create a framework and guidelines so that the executive director or CEO sort of has that playing field defined, and they know the board's desires and how they can operate within those guidelines and within that playing field. But again, Heather's going to talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And I should add to all of that, that the board is also responsible for managing its own structures and processes. So I won't take the time to read through this list, but you can see it very clearly there. The board needs to be in a spot where you have a system in place and systems in place where you understand how are we bringing on new board members? How are we identifying the responsibilities of board members? Are we evaluating how we're doing as a board, and are we evaluating individual board members? Are we running meetings in a way that are smooth and actually get something done? Do we have the right committees in place to ensure adequate leadership? And so again, a number of responsibilities that need to happen, but add to the list that you need to manage yourselves well, and the board needs to be a great functioning and well-working team, and you are responsible for that. So we've just talked about a number of things here, but let me provide this summary slide. In summary, the board is to monitor the organization's achievement of its goals and outcomes, ensure fiduciary solvency and integrity. That's connected with resources. You are to hire, care for, evaluate, and fairly compensate your CEO and executive director. The board is to delegate authority and understand the authority of the CEO or executive director so that it frees them up to advance the mission. And one of the ways that you delegate that authority and again define the playing field, so to speak, is through written policy guidelines and parameters. And you are to evaluate and constantly improve the board's structure, process, and functions so that you again are a well-working team that can best serve the organization. So won't take the time to pause and ask you how you're doing with these foundational concepts, but just begin to think through which ones are you doing well right now, maybe not so well, and where do you need perhaps some improvement. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to turn it over to Heather right now. Heather, take it away and share with us about topic number 2.
All right, would love to do that. Had to hit that unmute button. Yeah, so that, Jonathan, what you just described, I love that overview of looking at what the board is responsible for. And as we all sat there listening and watching, I was just asking some questions in the chat box to get you to go, how are you doing with that? Feel free to put it in the chat box as we continue on. We're going to go deeper now into these areas, and we're looking specifically at governance responsibilities and kingdom perspective. And you may be asking, hey, Heather, Jonathan, what do you mean by governance? Well, this is a great model that we use a lot that was developed by somebody else, but has been very helpful to see and understand 5 different models that boards could look like. And so from the left going to the right, we've got board as staff, board as managers, skipping over the board as governance, board as advisors, and boards as figureheads. So these are 5 different models that we see. And with those particular models, you can see there is a pink area, and the pink area represents what the board is responsible for. And that shifts from these different models. The blue area is what the CEO and the staff, the management of the organization, would be responsible for. So when you look clear over to the left on the board as staff, this is often what starts when an organization starts with you get a brand new nonprofit, they don't have any staff, no one's being paid, and the board does everything. So they're responsible from everything from day-to-day activities that are keeping the board afloat. They're talking about strategies all the way up to really being legally responsible. But as you move from left to right, you can see that as the organization grows, you have this blue taking responsibility. But the reason I skipped over that board as governors part in the middle is because that's actually what is determined not just by us. Of course, Jonathan and I will support this. We agree with it. But all the experts out there are saying that the goal is to be a healthy board that is functioning well in an organization, bringing leadership is going to be a board as governance. And so that centerpiece would be the dream. But not everyone is quite there. And that's okay. You can be where you are. You have to think, where are we on this? If you're clear on the right side as board as figureheads, then that made a lot of founder boards turn this way, where basically they have a legal responsibility. But when it comes to how things get decided, the founder and their staff, they set the organizational objectives, they set the why we are here, what is the vision and the mission. They pretty much do everything. And board as figureheads would not be the healthiest place because the board's not taking responsibility. So the ideal place is here in the center as board as governors. You can see what they're focused on down in this near the bottom. This section says board spends most of its time overseeing, directing the work of the organization. They're not supervising and they're not just reviewing or affirming or cheerleading, but they're actually overseeing and giving high level direction. And the board is their primary output is oversight and setting direction, which matches with what Jonathan just highlighted as the board primarily is meant to set direction. And where we see this key place is right here in the middle. The board has the legal responsibility. The board has sets the reasons for the organization, and the board sets objectives for where we're going. Now, objectives means kind of what's the big picture? And then you can see it turns blue, and then the strategies to achieve those organizational objectives is where the staff really kick in, where the CEO with their team, however big or small that is, start to really define the strategies to accomplish the board picture of where we're going, how we're going to get there is what the staff gets engaged in. And I can imagine a bunch of you are thinking, oh, that's not quite how we function. And that's okay. But this is an ideal model that says, well, why would that be helpful and what would that accomplish? So when we look at how this moves, we're saying that if you, as a board, have this a board policy manual, which we're going to talk about, is that you can see in 2.8, this is a template that we have that we've been given from a very renowned board consultant. He developed this and we use this when we work with organizations. The board sets what are the major organizational objectives and goals. And this could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, depends upon the time frame that you're setting vision for, but it is looking forward. And then strategic planning, it says the board's expected to think strategically all the time, but the CEO helps put that plan together based on the policies that are set by the board, based on these objectives, and they determine how we're going to get there. So this is that partnership. So it doesn't mean that the board's not involved in strategic planning, and it doesn't mean that the staff aren't involved in helping shape the organizational goals and objectives, but it tells us where that line of who is actually ultimately responsible to move that forward. And so all that happens in board as a governors is through board policies. And we're going to look at that. What do we mean by board policies? Because there you can use the word policies in lots of ways. And sometimes in small organizations, we have one policy manual that puts everything together. But when we do that, it becomes a little bit confusing as who's responsible for what. So just to clarify here that the board policies are meant to be high level policies that establish the things Jonathan just outlined. Where are we going? What's the direction? So those talk about your purpose or your vision statement. It sets those objectives that are there. It sets parameters or even standards that go for that, so that helps the staff know what are the parameters we're working in. What are we not going to be doing, even from the highest level, versus an operational policy. Those are the things that you use day to day just to make sure that the organization is legally compliant, that we're doing things efficiently, effectively. So and a lot of times we talk about organizational policies as practices or procedures, but there are policies that get put in place. So just to clarify the difference there, that those high level ones, we're looking at policies that are going to set direction, are going to set limitations, set standards, help define board processes, or even help you stay in alignment with some of the external standards that are out there, like harassment standards, protection policies for your own people. So outside governing agencies can say your organization needs to be in alignment with certain things. So the board will sometimes set those broad policies. So just to look at some examples to get just one layer down is here's just a few examples of types of policies. And you go, which are they? Board policies or operational policies? Sometimes it's hard to tell because sometimes it's actually both. You can see here, just as I sorted those, that there are financial controls and policies that are both at the board level, which would be at the highest level, versus also at the operational level. So the board might say that the CEO can spend money up to an expenditure of $10,000, but after that must get board approval. That's a board level financial policy versus there needs to be 2 signatures on every expenditure that's over $500. That could be an operational policy that goes in place. So some of you that think I know this, I'm very familiar with it. Sometimes it's confusing. The whole point of a policy, because I think most people will think policies aren't that exciting. We don't jump up every day going, oh boy, I'm going to get to write new policies. But the point of a policy and the reason that the board is a policy governance board driven governing through policies is so that you can create a culture where the executive that you have in place that you're delegating your authority to run the organization, they understand, what they need to do to perform. What are the expectations? It also sets parameters for them so they know how to work within it. Many times Jonathan and I will hear an executive say, I don't know when my board wants to speak into something. So it's through a policy that the board then determines and sets in place that says, when you do this, the board needs to be involved. If you start a new program, then some boards say, we want to know any new program, we want to approve it. Some boards say, no, only programs that are 20% of the budget or more, then we want to speak into it. So it defines when does the CEO, executive director need to get board approval. So it helps them know how to perform in their job. It also reduces risk. Because if you know what the policy is, you know where the parameter is, where your boundaries are, and it says, okay, we don't do this, and there should be a good reason why we don't do certain things. And so that's an area that policies help us reduce our risk, and very important to a board leadership and board governance. Based on that duty of obedience, is we want to make sure we follow the laws of the land around us in good wisdom. And it provides a kind of culture where people can they understand how they can do their job well. So when you have clear policies and you don't over create policies that restrict people too much, but they understand the working, how where they're to work within, what they should be doing, when to engage others, that creates the kind of a culture where people can thrive in the jobs that they have, and the mission can be accomplished without getting stuck. And I would say, one of the things we said about this section that we wanted to touch base on is that, a lot of policy and governance is the same whether you're a faith-based organization or if you're a secular organization. So what's the difference for those of us that are faith-based, Christ-centered? And I love this book. I cannot emphasize how good it is for a board. It is relatively new. Scott Roden is one of my favorite authors when it comes to boards, fundraising, all of that. He's kingdom rooted. And this is a simple novelette book called The Greater Mission. And I love this quote: at the root of every healthy board culture, and he's speaking to those of us that are faith-based, Christ-centered, is the decision of its board whether it will operate as an owner board or a steward board. So when you think of board as governance, and you go back to what Jonathan said that came out of Matthew, what Jesus said, is that we're to be servants of this higher purpose. And when we're a servant, then we're stewarding who is the true owner, and that's God himself. He's the one that has the vision that called us into being. We're serving him. And all too often, sometimes we'll bring people onto a board because they feel the duty of loyalty, they feel the duty of obedience, they feel the duty of care. We start to become an owner focused, like we own this thing rather than we steward it. And when we look at the difference between how these two boards operate, it is night and day. And those that have read this book, it was like a light bulb came on and said, this is what we needed to understand how we're to operate as a Christ-centered board. That we make decisions differently when we don't feel the weight of ownership, but we feel like we're being a good steward of what God has called us to. So when you put together this mindset of a board that understands that we're going to govern through policies, but we're not the owner, we're a steward of what God's called us to do, then you have a beautiful mix that really allows God's ministry, God's way, and for him to get all the glory. And so I think mixing those two really helps us understand the role of a governance-focused board and how we're to govern through policies so that an organization can thrive. All right, the third point we want to talk about is really about roles. What's the difference between the role of the board and the role of your president, CEO, executive director, whatever term you're using, that is your delegated leader? And so when we look at that, this is a diagram that Jonathan and I love to do. We like to draw it on a napkin. And so we did the best job we could here to do it out for you. But typically, the starting point is you're here. And that's wherever you are right now as a board. It could be you're starting brand new. It could be you've been around for 20 years. I know an organization that's going to celebrate their 40th anniversary. So this is where you are today. And as a board, you're saying, where is God calling us to go? We call that the ends. So when we look at where we are now and where God's calling us to go, that's the vision of direction. That's the end point. And then we have a word, and these terms, ends and means, are very typical governance language. We talk about policies that are ends policies and means policies. But here's the question: who's responsible for the ends? And who's responsible for the means? And this is where sometimes the confusion comes in. And we've asked this question with different boards when we meet with them one on one, and we get a variety of answers. But most people really do see and understand that the board's role is understanding the ends. Remember back in that 5 model? It's the board that together as this unified group has the leadership authority to say, where is God calling us to go? Doesn't mean that the staff don't have a voice in it, can't, share their ideas, bring that up to the board, but the board ultimately is responsible for that. And notice, where is this on this diagram? The board is way up at the top in that ends, looking down on this vision of where you are and where you're going. We call that the 30, 60,000 foot view, not the down in the weeds view. So that means that the down in the weeds view is the CEO's role. It's how do we get there? The means to get there. So implementing programming, raising resources to get that's how we get there. That are the strategies we want to get there. So this is where the board has oversight, and we talk about governing and oversight versus on the grounds getting it done. Now, if you're a board as staff, you're going to be doing both of them. If your board is figurehead, you get your head up in the clouds so high that you sometimes don't even really bring a clarity on where God is calling us. You kind of figure, hey, that's the job of the CEO. So you step back. But this is really the shared responsibility is where the board sets that direction, helps understand the parameters, and then the CEO continues to move that forward. Another part of board leadership is understanding that the chair leads the board. So having a role, we really love to see it when the chair and your executive director, CEO, president, whatever term you're using for that delegated leader, that you have a separate person that leads your board, and then the CEO, executive director leads the organization. That's the ultimate desire so that you have two people focusing in two different areas. They work really well together, but they support. So the chair supports the executive director as the one agent that has been delegated authority. And so the chair can have the function of helping the board function and do its job. And the CEO then takes that leader, what the board is directing, and then leads the organization forward. It's a great distinction, works well together. You want a partnership so that they're really working as they head toward that direction that's being set together in a one united way of pulling together. And this is this idea of one voice board, one voice, one agent. You hear that in different times. So what does that mean? One voice, one agent. Well, board members are just that. They're board members that act together as one voice of a board. It's not a bunch of board members. It's actually a board that has a one voice decision-making purpose. So you may have different individuals that are a part of this board, different views, but at the end of the day, the whole point of the board is to bring clarity of the direction that is a one voice direction. Whereas the CEO has the delegated authority then to carry that out. So they lead and manage that overall operations using all the resources to make sure that the nonprofit day to day does the very thing that the board, and the CEO is usually on the board, part of the board, says this is the direction of where we're going, and then the CEO carries that out. So the CEO is considered the executive director, whatever, is the one agent of the board that has delegated authority. So that role is super important to understand, that the board is a group of people with one voice that then gives direction to the one agent as a unified one voice, not as separate individual voices. Worst case scenario, I love these little diagrams here that say, if you've got a board that says we want chocolate. I want pie. No, I want cookies. And everyone has their different opinion. And what happens with the CEO? They're like, I have no idea what you want. Not helpful for the CEO. That's not a way in which a board wants to function with all these different voices. Now the CEO doesn't know what to do. What does the board decided they want to have happen? Then if you throw in there a board committee, and now the board finally says, we want cookies. They finally get their voice together as one voice, but now you have a board committee that says, we want pie. At the end of the day, the CEO has no idea. Do I listen to the board? Do I listen to the committee? What do I do? And it's not about who has the most influence, but the idea is for the board to be able to make a decision based on connections with committees. And then we're going to look at committees in just a minute. If you don't use them, how can we use them more effectively? So that there is this one voice that says, we want cookies. And now the CEO is like, okay, I came out of my meeting. I'm not confused. I'm not frustrated. I am clear that we're going to get cookies. And I like cookies. So that's a great way to go for it. So in essence, board members, they have one voice, they come together, but board members have three hats. As an individual, you are a board member, you are a governance board member only when you're in a board meeting, only when you are acting with one voice together. So that means that when you show up to help out at a fundraising event, you do not have the authority of the board to make decisions and to direct somebody. And we've seen this happen where a board member will walk up to CEO or a staff member and say, I'm a board member and this isn't a good way to do it. You need to do it this way, right in the middle of an event, right in the middle of an activity. And the confusion that that creates for that staff person is pretty significant. So when you are stepping out of a board meeting as a board member and you go to an event, if you are helping in that event, you're a volunteer. If you are a participant and you're just showing up and you've got a table and you've got a bunch of friends, then you're a participant in that event. But board members, sometimes a board will say, we want all of our board members to act as volunteers every year. And that's a great expectation. It's not required for board members to have to be a volunteer, but you can make it a requirement of your board to say, we'd like you to be a volunteer twice a year in one program. You can do that. But as soon as you step out of the boardroom, it's important for you to understand and then for you to make sure everyone around you understands you hold no authority as a board member to make a decision or to direct or to lead the organization. And I know this sometimes is like, we've had boards go, let's just talk about this for the next 30 minutes because the board helps start the organization. They're volunteering at every level and they're saying, okay, so how do we make a decision? So we see something that needs to change. What do we do? And this helped them to say, when you're a volunteer, you're acting under the authority of the staff structure that's there. And so you could go up to the CEO and go, hey, I have an idea. Can we meet for coffee later? That I can share my thoughts with you on that last event. That's great. That's not interruptive. But you're not able to tell them what to do. If you really think it's important, you go, hey, I think we want to put this on our next board meeting agenda. Let's talk about this at the board meeting so we can come up with a one voice decision if it's something that's that important. So that's how you can facilitate that and still have influence, but it's not in the middle creating confusion. This is so important for board members to understand, staff to understand, and, which is sometimes you have to be even clear enough to say, I've got my volunteer hat on right now, and I wanted to share a thought with you and shift those hats.
And Heather, can I just jump in for a second?
Sure.
Some of you are thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much good information here, including the three hats. I would love for our board to understand this stuff. Then one of the things we would say is take some of this information and begin to incorporate it into some board training. This slide right here is really significant, and your board members need to understand which hat they're wearing at different times. And a lot of boards have a lot of confusion about this. And so as you're seeing some of this material, begin to process it and think about, hey, how can I begin to share some of this with my board? It could be a great opportunity to do that.
Yep. And this is a really important one. And if you're an executive director and you've experienced the pain of the confusion of these different hats, it's a good one to bring up to your chair and to say, can we talk about this? And even to do it almost, I think doing it at least, when there's an issue, but also building this into your recruitment process. So as Jonathan talked about training, this is a great clarifier, even as you bring new people on to help them understand the different roles of a board member and what they're expected to do in these roles. Do you expect them to participate? Do you expect them to volunteer? And then help them understand what their role is as a board member. Because there's nothing worse than a board member that really thinks they're going to come in and change your programming, and then you're really going to have a wrestling match in that. So this is a great training tool and a great prep tool for new board members to understand what those expectations and responsibilities are. All right, our last point. And this point, there's really, I have 3 subpoints under it and a lot of slides, so I'm not going to go deep into it. So you'll be able to look at some of these slides later when we send it to you. But the idea of how do we actually function as a board? What makes a really good board meeting, and how do we use board committees? And here is one. I don't know if you ever have heard of Prince Henry of Portugal. That's who that picture is. But he's such a good example of an incredible navigator. And when we talk about a board chair, we're talking about a skilled person that has the ability to help people see the vision and look forward. It's looking for somebody among your board that's not just a great idea person, but can model and says, how do we navigate a board meeting and get the most out of it? How do we engage people together? And what makes a skilled navigator? Well, number one, they need to have that vision of where we're headed. And so they need to be aligned with with your executive director on where is God calling us to go. They don't set the direction by themselves. That's set by the board, but they have the ability to navigate what is the need going forward. So navigating board direction, having someone that can champion people, draw people in. Prince Henry led so many different uh, trips going out into the sea. He's the one that he wasn't himself an explorer, but he brought in captains. He helped people identify what are the resources we need, because he believed there was a world out there that would help us get our ships from the Portugal area around to India in a way that no one even believed possible, because they thought the world was flat. So you need to have a plan that you charter the way forward. So a good board has a good chair that knows how to make a good agenda. And that agenda needs to be something that the CEO, executive director, speaks into, but is also really going to accomplish board work. You don't want to have it only being reporting, but you want to make sure there's room for board discussions. And board discussions is that you have to be focused on the future. And I've got that future little scope there, but also the rear view mirror. So rear view mirrors are important, but a rear view mirror, you cannot drive forward by always only looking back. If you think about your new driver, any of you trying to train up your kids or grandkids on driving, you don't want them to spend all their time looking in the rear view mirror, but the rear view mirror does give us some wisdom. And so you think, how do we get the right balance of looking forward, learning from the past, and having the right kind of agenda for our meeting, and having an agenda that's out far enough in advance with the right materials? That's part of charting that course so that the board can have an effective meeting. So I think when we saw this study that ECFA did, and that's Evangelical Council of Financial Accountability, they are a big promoter of governance as a board model. And they have been bringing these 7 standards, actually, I think they have 8 now, standards of responsibility for good stewardship. And they do these surveys once in a while. And this survey was focused on an effective board meeting. And what they found is that 67% of all the boards that are a part of the ECFA spend some time on future needs. Now, that was shocking to me when I first saw that. That means that you have 33% of them that spend no time working, looking at the future. Wow, that's like, learning to drive, only looking backwards. That's a little crazy to me. So then, what they highlighted is that 87% of boards that consider themselves highly effective boards, so these are the cream of the crop, 87% of them spend at least half of their time in the board meeting looking forward. So that it creates a whole different standard. It's a little scary to think that you got 32% that aren't even looking forward, but that really effective ones spend at least half of their time looking forward. That's a good percentage. And then the last one, it says across all the ministries, only 44% spent, it said a typical board meeting spent on future compared to reviewing the past. So you've got some stats here that create the first and the last one that say there's a little concern, and that's why they put this out, is we're not setting direction, looking far enough forward. And when a board spends their time looking in the past, what happens is they start getting into the weeds and they start getting into the means and not focused on the ends. So you're not governing, and you start to move as managers or staff, and you start to get into that micromanaging. So here's what Board Source said as a standard. So that last thing said at least half percent. Board Source said that at least 70% of a board's agenda should be consisted of strategic discussions and not just reports and operational items, which really should be the job of the staff or the means of how the staff get there. So it's saying, let's not micromanage. Let's be strategic. Let's be future oriented. That's what makes an effective board meeting. And so how do we do that? Well, good questions, getting your board to be strategic thinker by asking good questions, things that help them open up the possibilities. You look at the past and you say, all right, so, tell us, here's a staff report. What are our strengths? Board doesn't even have, board can be a part of that, but you can ask for a report. And then the board says, how do we leverage our strengths? That's a great generative question that generates new ideas, considers options, and helps move things forward. If you're talking about challenges and threat, how do we mitigate those? So now we're talking about future. How do we move forward? If we're looking at our finances, how do we diversify? How do we focus? How do we, also leverage the things that are going well? That's the kind of board conversations you want to have that doesn't say, hey, I want to do a golf tournament. That's a means question. But if you say, how do we diversify? How do we leverage what we're doing well? That stays up at the board level. What metrics should be our indicators? Board question when we're measuring success. When we think of strategic planning, it's, what are our stakeholders? What are their needs? That keeps us focused on our purpose and not just surviving as an organization, as Jonathan talked about. So those areas are critical. And these are some practical things that you can do. And I'm not going to go through every one of them, but it's getting people to start to prep, getting your staff that doesn't just give you a report, but starts to pose questions to the board to help the board think that way. Things that give people time to be thinking ahead. You've got to get reports out there ahead so the board can think future wise, can think generatively, can think strategically going forward. So that's what we want to ask is, what do we do to facilitate future oriented, strategic, fruitful discussions at the board level that keep them thinking about the ends? And one thing that will help too is utilizing standing committees for boards. And if you've got a board committees, great. If you don't have them, here's some things to think about. Committees really are the worker bees for the board. They do the work between board meetings that boards need to have done. They do the research. They will go back and they will follow up with maybe a staff report. They will make recommendations. They can draft different new policies for the board to set in place. All of that is the work of the committee. And committees, they don't, though, they speak to the board, not for the board. So the committee is not they're not voting. Sometimes there's confusion about that. A committee is there to do the work of the board, then to make a recommendation to the board of what to do, and then the board makes the decision. So they don't speak for the board, they're doing the work of the board. And you know what I love about committees? Is you can, even if you're a small board of 4 or 5 people, if you bring on a committee and you facilitate committees, you can have a requirement that every committee has at least 2 board members or 3 board members, and then bring on some new people with expertise in the areas of your committees, which could also potentially become future board members. It's a way to kind of date or expose other people to your board and what your organization is doing, and check it out if they might be good board members. So you're expanding your capacity as a board doing board committees. But making sure that the board committee is clear. And we recommend every board committee has a charter to clarify what they're called to do, because the board should be saying, here's your responsibilities for what you do. And you're doing governance work that the board sets in place and is responsible to do. You don't do staff work ever. It's not about overseeing staff. And it's not about making decisions for the board. So we always want to remember that committees they're operating under the board, not under the CEO. If you have a CEO committee, that committee, we would, call that an operational committee or a task force, something that's helping the CEO do what they want to do. But when you need a committee for the board, those are different. They're doing board committee work. So you need to have clarity of what that committee is doing. And we actually have a recorded training that goes through all 6 of these steps. So you can go on to our resource page and see it, but you have to start by just defining what are those standing committees we need, or what are the ad hoc committees that might need to be raised. Here's some of the most common ones. And I would say if you're going to start somewhere, especially for small boards, I would start with the governance or the finance committee. And some of you might have just said, well, wait a minute, why not the executive committee? Well, if you have a small board, you kind of are the executive committee, because there's only got 4 or 5 people, and the executive committee would take your main officers, so you don't need a new executive committee. But a governance committee is tasked to govern the board, to help recruit people, to help evaluate all those things that were on Jonathan's slide earlier. The governance committee does the work of that behind the scenes, and then all they do is bring up to the board, here's some people that are up for re-election, or here's some people we want to recommend to the board as new board members, or it's time for a board evaluation, here's the form to fill out. So they get all ready so the board can just do those things. And then, of course, the finance committee, because ensuring proper resources, you want the finance committee to look at those reports. They help for the 990. They help on all sorts of areas. It's a great way for the board to really extend their work outside of board meetings, to get outside people who have expertise in those areas, and to get some help. And the last thing I want to say, and then we're going to get close to wrapping this up, is that when you think of board meetings, when you think of board committees, we have to think about decision making. You know, what is our decision making model? And there's a lot of different ways that people make the decisions. And in board meetings, you make a lot of small one voice decisions, like, you all agree to accept the board meeting minutes, the last one as they're written. That's a small decision that doesn't require a lot of overthinking this. You don't need to do a lot when it comes to just re-electing somebody. Even some of the policies that are in place don't need a full decision-making process. But there are time to time major decisions that the board needs to make. If the board is considering buying a piece of property, or buying an asset like a vehicle or something that has a significant financial impact, the question of the board is, do we go in debt? That's a board level decision. And we would say major decisions really do need to have a decision making process or approach that you think about, how are we going to go about looking at that? Is it that we're going to just use our standard of the majority wins? I'm not sure that for major decisions, that's it. In fact, one organization we were working with, they made it so difficult to change the organizational purpose that they have to have a unanimous agreement over, I think, 3 years before they can change the board's purpose statement. I was like, wow, that's a long process. That to me would be like heavy. Here's another option. What about looking at board decisions, especially as a Christ-centered one, from the perspective of thinking of as discerning process? How do we engage God in this and discern it? This is a book that's written by Jim Brown, the Imperfect Board Member. I resonated with this one because the first time I was on a board, I was like, no idea, totally imperfect, trying to figure this out. But he highlights that governance demands prudence and time. And governance decision making is different than operational decision making. And sometimes we put on boards these big, business leaders that have been successful, church leaders that have been successful, and they're used to making operational decisions that are quick hitting, get it done. Board decisions that are big decisions need time, need discernment, need wisdom in order to get everyone aligned together and to go, you know, we don't want to get this one wrong. And so we have to be jointly, it says making time for the whole board to be properly informed jointly convinced about a new direction that is more important than pushing an idea forward. And there's so much wisdom in that. So, how do we make that process? And there's all kinds of these operations of how do we make decisions. So, I just reflect on how you make big decisions. What does your board do? Have you clarified that to your board members? How do we make some of these big decisions? That's where policies can come into place. And in this call to the chair that was written by David McKenna, he highlights a process that helps people, helps the chair even take the board through a process. So I'm not saying this is the right process for everyone, but it made time for contemplation to see, are we all on the same page before they came up with that final decision? And ECFA has a lesson that's on this that's basically saying to you when you are making a decision, how do we recognize when God is tapping in and trying to get our attention on something? How do we seek God's direction in our big decisions? What does that look like on your board? So that you can move from just human reasoning and use the gifts God's given us, but also engage God. And, they're saying we need to have a way in which we make space for that. What does spiritual discernment look like? What's the process for our board and defining that? So they had a whole lesson on this idea. It says if we're going to engage in discerning, what does that look like? How do we listen well? And out of that process for me, when I was on a board, this was the highlight, that something that I took away. And this comes out of the contemplative world, where Ignatius calls it holy indifference. Another way to think of this is surrender or being open-minded. But a holy indifference is not indifference to God or being apathetic to something, but it's being detached to my own preferences. I'm going to be indifferent to my own ideas. Sometimes we come into a big decision, we have an opinion, it's a strong one, and people voice it, and there's a little arm wrestling. But this is saying, how do we lead the board in a way where we all surrender to our own thoughts, perspectives, in order to hear and gain insight and discernment around us, and how is God leading us? And so learning to cultivate a posture of holy indifference when we come to big decisions, it helps everybody kind of own their own stuff and go, okay, I'm going to put down my opinions. I'm willing to listen to others and listen for where is God leading us. And so you can do a lot of things to become a community of discernment. And these are just a few, and there's great resources out there that you could, as a board, read a book together, think about this and go, how do we want to build a process for good decision making around big things? And I think you don't want to wait till you have to make a big decision to do this. You want to be proactive to come up with this. Otherwise, you can get some very funky board practices that just happen out of need. So that kind of winds up this top four. And so, Jonathan, I'm going to hand this back to you.
I'm just going to hit a couple things in closing here. And how about this for an encouraging quote, everybody, from the book, The Board and the CEO? It says that when an organization dies, that can almost always be traced back to the board. So does that encourage you this morning? We share this to say that the role of the board is just so important. And so we don't share this quote as a discouragement, but to just reiterate how important board leadership is. Board leadership is important for keeping the organization on track. Again, making sure that it's operating the way that it's supposed to operate, and making sure that it stays on the path that God is calling it to stay on. And so what typically happens before an organization dies is it drifts off course. And one of the main responsibilities of the board is to make sure that there is no drift. You say, Jonathan, do organizations actually die? All the time. That's why when somebody says we are getting ready to celebrate our 100th year in operation, we all go, whoa, 100 years, that's incredible, right? Because typically organizations don't last that long. And that's not always a bad thing, right? God puts us in place for seasons, and we need to understand that and trust that. But when an organization does drift off course, and eventually get so off course that it ends up not being in existence anymore. That is usually traced back to the board. So boards are important. We've got to get the right people around that table that understand the goals, what God is calling them to do, and a board that understands their roles and responsibilities. And then I just want to highlight really quickly something that Heather mentioned earlier, and we'll just go to a screenshot here of our website, is that you can go to venture19.org/resources, and you can find all of our online training that we've done over the years. But you can hit the boards tab right there. You can see it highlighted in red. And when you get there, you can download some other information on boards. You can view past training on boards, and this is also where today's training will be. And as an example of some things you can find there, we've got other sessions that we've done. The board's role in fundraising, set up, show up, follow up, a great session, board success, the crucial role of recruiting and orienting board members. Heather and I get this question all the time. Where do I find good board members? How do I prepare people for board leadership? So we did a session on that. A lunch and learn, which is less than an hour on board committees. Heather just talked about board committees a little bit. And so that may be a session that will be of great value to you. And how about this? Solving the mysteries of the board treasurer role. So what is a board treasurer supposed to do, and how can that individual be successful? And so be sure to go again, venture19.org/resources, and view past trainings and download resources and different things like that. Also, if you get there and you're looking for something specific and it is not there, then email Heather or myself and we will find something for you. So just we'll be able to find something and help you out in any way that that you need help there. And then in closing, just before we open it up for additional questions, I just want to remind you, and Heather wants to remind you this morning, that that God holds it all. And I love this picture here with this psalm. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. He founded it and established it. The gentleman who took this picture researched this, and I believe tried to figure out the timing of this over the course of a number of years, and finally got this picture right here. And it's just a reminder in my mind that that God is the one who holds it all together. We want to make sure that we're keeping the Lord at the center of all that we're trying to do with our mission and vision, that we're gaining direction from Him, and that our board is operating from a Christ-centered standpoint. So we believe that with all of our hearts, and want to make sure that that you understand that as well, and we hope that you believe that as well. But great to see everybody today. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me pray for us, and then we'll let you go. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for these leaders. God, I thank you for the work you're doing through them and through their organizations. Needs are being met. The gospel's being advanced. People are coming to faith. We're just excited about that. And Lord, we want to lead well. We want to govern well. We want our boards to work effectively and help move our organizations to a place of even greater significance and impact. And so, Father, I just pray that you would continue to speak to each and every one of us on this call today about something that needs attention, or something maybe that you're calling us to adjust or change. Make that clear to us. Give us the strength and the courage to move in that direction. And God, I just pray that you would bless these leaders personally in a special way. Just continue to sustain them with your strength and power. Lead them with the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. And Lord, just help us to be tuned in to the directions that you want us to go and the things that you want us to get done. God, I thank you for these leaders and for the way that they inspire us at Venture 19. Thank you again, Lord, for this time. And we commit the rest of this day and this week to you. Use us in great ways. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.